The Galactic Council had always been a place of order, a hub where the most advanced civilizations of the galaxy gathered to make decisions about who could flourish and who could not. For centuries, humans had been watched from afar, their rapid development noticed but not yet fully understood. The Council had always seen them as unpredictable, their creativity unmatched, but also frightening in its potential. No other species had advanced so fast, built technology so quickly, or taken risks that often seemed reckless. And now, that unpredictability had become too much for the Council to ignore. It began with warnings. Small incidents at first, humans arriving at distant trading stations without prior permission, experimenting with technology that rivaled the Council's own, and creating innovations that no one had thought possible. The Council, with its rigid rules and centuries of careful planning, saw this as a threat. Their debates became heated. Some argued that humans should be embraced, that their ingenuity could benefit everyone. Others, far more cautious, insisted that humanity must be controlled, or perhaps even removed, before it could disrupt the careful balance of power in the galaxy. The humans themselves were unaware of the storm brewing against them. Life on Earth had been evolving, yes, but now it had spread beyond the planet. Colonies on nearby planets, research outposts on moons, and even experimental starships were quietly expanding humanity's reach. They were not doing it to challenge the Council. They were doing it out of curiosity, ambition, and a desire to survive. But to the Council, survival had become a dangerous excuse for rebellion. One day, the call came. A fleet appeared in orbit around the home planet, massive ships from multiple alien species, each one bearing the insignia of the Galactic Council. Communication channels were opened, and the voice of the Council echoed through the human command centers. They demanded that humanity explain their actions, justify their technologies, and answer for every misstep, real or imagined. The humans prepared themselves, not fully understanding the magnitude of the situation. They believed that reason, logic, and evidence would convince the Council that humanity was capable of handling its growth responsibly. But the Council was not listening in the way humans expected. They were swayed by fear, by centuries of rigid thinking, and by the subtle biases of species that had long considered themselves superior. Small misunderstandings were blown out of proportion. Experiments intended to improve energy efficiency were labeled as weapons development. Trade missions to distant planets were seen as attempts to form alliances against the Council. Every defense humanity offered was twisted, every explanation questioned. The final verdict was devastating. Humanity was declared a threat, not because they had acted violently, but because their potential could not be controlled. They were exiled from interstellar space, barred from Council systems, and forbidden from accessing critical resources. Their colonies were cut off, their allies warned to abandon them, and any attempt to interact with Council members was strictly forbidden. The punishment was swift and absolute. Humans watched in disbelief. There was anger, of course, and fear, but beneath it all was a quiet determination. They were being pushed to the edge, yes, but they were still alive, still capable, and still together. In the first moments after the decision, humans held emergency councils of their own. Scientists, engineers, military leaders, and ordinary citizens joined together to discuss what must be done. There were no outsiders to help them now, no council to appeal to, no interstellar aid. They were alone, truly alone. For the first time in their history. In that moment, humans realized something important. Exile was not just punishment. It was a test. The galaxy had rejected them, but humanity had always thrived on challenge. This was the kind of adversity that could either destroy them or push them to heights no one had imagined. And humans, stubborn and resourceful, chose the latter. Plans were made immediately. Leaders coordinated with scientists to identify habitable worlds beyond the Council's reach. They studied distant star charts, calculated routes that would take them far from prying eyes, and prepared their ships for long voyages. It was not just a journey of escape, it was a journey of survival and reinvention. Meanwhile, emotions ran high. There was fear for the young, worry for the weak, and sorrow for those who had dedicated their lives to projects now declared illegal by the Council. But there was also hope. Every human being felt a surge of determination, a desire to prove that their species was not to be underestimated. They were reminded of every challenge their ancestors had faced, every obstacle overcome through creativity, courage, and sheer persistence. Exile was merely the latest challenge, and humans had always faced challenges with resilience. As the ships prepared for departure, families gathered to say goodbyes to friends and colleagues who would not make the journey. Stories were shared of courage, small victories, and moments of kindness in difficult times. These stories reminded everyone why they were human and why humanity had always survived against the odds. It was not technology alone that made them strong. It was empathy, determination, and the will to endure. The moment of departure was quiet but powerful. Ships lifted from their home planet, engines blazing, as humans embarked on a journey into the unknown. There was no cheering, no celebration. Instead, there was a solemn awareness that this voyage marked the beginning of a new chapter, one written by their own hands. They were leaving behind the galaxy they had known, but they were carrying with them knowledge, creativity, and the spark of human ambition. In the early days of exile, there were moments of doubt. Some wondered if they had made the right choice, if survival was truly possible without the support of the Council. Food, water, and energy supplies were stretched thin, and harsh conditions tested every skill and every ounce of courage. Yet, humans adapted. They created new ways to grow food in confined spaces, developed energy systems that could run independently, and learned to navigate uncharted star systems with precision. Every day was a lesson, every challenge a step toward proving that humans could thrive where others thought they would fail. In these early months, a new sense of identity emerged. Humans were no longer simply explorers or colonists. They were survivors, innovators, and builders of a future that no one else could imagine. The experience of exile forced them to cooperate in ways they never had before. Differences that had once divided them became strengths, each perspective contributing to the larger goal of survival. The human spirit, tested to its limits, began to shine more brightly than ever. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, watched from afar, expecting humanity to falter. Reports reached them of humans struggling on barren planets, facing dangers that should have ended them. But time and again, humans adapted, overcame, and pushed further. The Council could not understand that this struggle was not a weakness. It was the crucible in which human strength was forged. Every hardship, every setback, became a lesson in resilience, ingenuity, and cooperation. And so, as the first chapter of exile drew to a close, humans had already begun to change. They were no longer just a species trying to survive. They were a species preparing to rise. They had left the Council behind, but they had not left their ambition, their intelligence, or their hope. In the quiet of distant stars, humans were beginning to dream again, not of what they had lost, but of what they could become. The Council's fear had given them a gift they did not yet realize, freedom to build their own future. Unbound by rules designed to contain them, the seeds of the empire that would one day dominate the galaxy were sown in exile. It was a beginning born of fear and rejection, but also of courage and determination. Humans were small in number, limited in resources, and isolated from allies, but their greatest strength had always been their ability to turn adversity into opportunity. Exile was just the first test, and humans were determined to pass it with resilience, creativity, and unwavering resolve. After leaving the galaxy they had once called home, humans entered a period of struggle unlike any they had faced before. Exile was no longer just a word or a punishment, it was a harsh reality. The planets they reached were often unforgiving. Harsh winds tore across barren landscapes, temperatures swung between extremes, and resources were scarce. Water, food, and energy were no longer guaranteed. Every day was a test of survival, and every night brought uncertainty. The humans quickly realized that old ways of living would not work in this new environment. Cities built on Earth could not be replicated here. Farms could not thrive in alien soil. They had to adapt and fast. Engineers, scientists, and ordinary citizens worked side by side, often in dangerous conditions, to build shelters that could withstand storms and extreme temperatures. They invented ways to purify water from harsh rivers and collect energy from sunlight and wind, even when the sun seemed weak or the wind unpredictable. Each innovation was a small victory, a proof that humans could survive where no one else thought possible. Food was one of the first challenges. The soil on many of these planets was toxic or barren. Traditional crops would not grow. Scientists experimented with genetically modified plants, hydroponic farms, and alien algae that could sustain human life. Meals were simple, often tasteless, and repetitive, but they kept the people alive. Slowly, systems developed that allowed humans not just to survive, but to maintain a fragile sense of normalcy. Children were fed, families remained strong, and communities began to form. Life was not easy. Contention often ran high. Resources were limited, and disagreements were inevitable. Some people wanted to focus solely on survival, while others dreamed of exploring further and building technology that could give humans an advantage. Conflicts flared, but they were eventually resolved because humans learned quickly that unity was more important than personal ambition. The knowledge that failure could mean the end of entire communities forced them to cooperate. Every individual had to contribute, whether by farming, building, inventing, or protecting the group. Danger was always near. The planets they settled were home to creatures unlike anything humans had encountered before. Some were predatory, others poisonous, and many were completely unknown. Humans had to adapt to each new threat, studying it, observing its behavior, and finding ways to defend themselves. Hunting was necessary, not only for food, but also to understand the wildlife and how it could affect human settlements. Over time, humans developed weapons and protective gear specifically designed for these environments. Combining ingenuity with practical survival skills, communication became a lifeline. Humans built networks of signals, transmitters, and relays to stay connected across large distances. They shared discoveries, warned each other of dangers, and coordinated efforts to expand settlements. The isolated colonies began to feel like a single, united society rather than separate groups struggling alone. This sense of connection strengthened morale. Humans learned that survival was not just about food, shelter, or safety. It was about hope. And hope grew stronger when people knew they were not alone. As the years passed, humans began to experiment with the stars themselves. They realized that survival on a single planet, no matter how well prepared, was fragile. The idea of expansion became necessary not out of ambition, but necessity. Ships were built with advanced life support systems. Propulsion systems were improved to allow longer journeys through the void of space. Every voyage was dangerous, but every success brought humans closer to understanding that the universe could be conquered not by strength alone, but by persistence and creativity. Education and knowledge sharing became critical. Children born in exile had no memory of Earth, but they carried the spirit of human resilience. Schools and learning centers were established, where young minds were taught not just science and engineering, but also history, ethics, and survival skills. Elders shared stories of Earth, of challenges overcome, and of the injustices of the Galactic Council. These stories were more than just lessons. They were reminders of why humans had to endure and why they had to strive for something greater. Technology, though limited at first, became a tool for survival. Humans adapted their old designs to new worlds, often combining them with alien resources in ways no one had anticipated. Simple machines became lifelines, providing clean water, heat, or energy. Communication satellites kept communities informed. Farming and food processing became more efficient. Every invention, no matter how small, was celebrated. Humans learned that progress was a combination of necessity, imagination, and hard work. Social bonds grew stronger in this harsh environment. Communities relied on trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. Every individual had a role, and every role mattered. People discovered talents they never knew they had. An engineer could become a medic. A cook could learn to repair machinery. A teacher could guide explorers. Humans were learning to adapt not just to the environment, but to each other, creating bonds that were stronger than any hierarchy imposed by distant authorities like the Galactic Council. But even amid survival and adaptation, humans did not lose their curiosity. They explored caves, mountains, and alien forests, mapping the new worlds and studying their ecosystems. This exploration was not just practical, it was a reminder that humans were never meant to stay in one place, never meant to be controlled, and always driven to understand the unknown. Each discovery, whether a hidden water source or a new plant species, felt like a victory against the odds, proof that humans could thrive even in exile. Life was also filled with moments of joy and human connection. After long days of labor, people gathered to share stories, play music, or simply watch the alien sunsets. These moments reminded humans of what they were fighting for, of the beauty that still existed in the universe, and of the reason they could never give up. Even in the harshest conditions, laughter, love, and hope became essential forms of survival. Over time, humans began to reflect on what exile had truly done to them. They had lost the safety and resources of the galaxy, but they had gained something far more valuable: resilience, self-reliance, and the ability to solve problems creatively. They realized that the Galactic Council's punishment had forced them into a crucible, shaping their society in ways that no peaceful life ever could. Humans were no longer simply surviving, they were evolving. The first generation born in exile grew up knowing struggle and adaptation as the norm. They were strong, resourceful, and unafraid of risk. They were taught not only how to survive, but also how to thrive, how to work together, and how to innovate when no one else could help them. Every challenge faced by this generation became a lesson, and every lesson prepared them for the greater ambitions that humans had begun to dream of. By the end of this period of struggle, humans had transformed their new world into something extraordinary. What had begun as survival had become progress. Habitats were now sustainable, farms were efficient, energy was abundant, and communities were united. Humans had learned to adapt to any challenge, overcome any obstacle, and work together in ways that no one outside their society could fully understand. The harshness of exile had taught them lessons that prosperity never could. And yet, despite all the progress, humans looked outward to the stars with longing. The galaxy had rejected them, but it had also ignited a fire within them. They realized that survival was only the first step. The next step would be exploration, expansion, and eventually proving to the galaxy that humans were not a threat to be exiled, but a force to be reckoned with. The determination that began in the shadow of punishment now burned brightly, promising a future far beyond simple survival. Exile had forced humans to confront the limits of their ingenuity, endurance, and cooperation. In doing so, it had revealed the strength that would one day allow them to rise, not as a species confined by fear and rules, but as an empire built on resilience, intelligence, and unity. The harsh world of survival was no longer a prison, it was a proving ground. Humans had learned that they could endure anything, adapt to anything, and create anything. The galaxy had cast them aside, but in doing so, it had set the stage for humanity's greatest triumphs yet. After years of survival on harsh and distant planets, humans began to realize that mere endurance was not enough. Exile had taught them resilience, cooperation, and resourcefulness. But the next step required something even greater: innovation. They could no longer rely solely on the knowledge and tools they had brought from their home galaxy. To thrive, they needed to invent, experiment, and create technology that could carry them far beyond the limitations of survival. It started with small inventions. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly, experimenting with energy systems, materials, and machines that could withstand extreme environments. They developed new forms of water purification, systems to harness solar and wind power more efficiently, and devices that allowed crops to grow in soil that had once been considered barren. Every invention was tested, improved, and shared among the communities. Successes were celebrated quietly, but failures were studied with the same intensity. Humans understood that mistakes were not setbacks. They were lessons, and every lesson made them stronger. One of the most important breakthroughs came in transportation. Humans realized that if they were to explore the stars and expand beyond their current planets, they needed ships that could travel faster, farther, and safer than anything they had previously built. They began experimenting with propulsion systems, combining principles of physics they had known with observations from the alien worlds around them. At first, progress was slow. Ships were fragile, engines failed, and navigation was difficult. But humans had a unique advantage: persistence. Every failure was recorded, every flaw analyzed, and slowly. Their technology improved, while engineers focused on ships and energy systems. Other humans worked on artificial intelligence and communication systems. The colonies were spread across vast distances, and keeping communities connected became vital. Simple messaging systems evolved into networks capable of transmitting real-time data across star systems. IA was designed not just to assist in calculations or strategy, but to manage resources, predict environmental hazards, and even help train humans for survival and exploration. These systems were not perfect, but they were improving rapidly. And each improvement brought humans closer to independence from the old galaxy they had left behind. Exploration became both a necessity and a passion. Humans sent small teams to scout nearby star systems, mapping planets, moons, and asteroid belts. They discovered resources that no other species had noticed: minerals, gases, and even forms of energy that could be harnessed for fuel and construction. Every discovery was documented and shared, and slowly, humans began to understand that exile had forced them into a unique position. While the rest of the galaxy had underestimated them, humans were learning to adapt, create, and thrive in ways that no one else had imagined. But technology was only part of the equation. Humans also had to learn to work together in new ways. The isolation of exile had already forged strong communities, but now the stakes were higher. As technology advanced, so did the need for coordination, planning, and discipline. Humans developed councils and committees, not as a means of imposing control, but to ensure that every individual's knowledge, skill, and creativity could contribute to the greater goal. Leaders emerged not because of birthright or authority, but because they had proven their ability to solve problems, innovate, and inspire others. Science became a central part of human culture. Schools and research centers were established on multiple planets, each one focusing on specific areas: energy, agriculture, space travel, and medicine. Children grew up learning the value of observation, experimentation, and critical thinking. They were taught that intelligence was not just about knowledge, but about the ability to use that knowledge to solve real problems. The first generation born entirely in exile became not only survivors, but innovators. They questioned old assumptions, experimented boldly, and embraced the challenges of the universe as opportunities rather than threats. One of the most remarkable aspects of this period was how humans combined old knowledge with new discoveries. They studied alien plants, animals, and minerals, and found ways to incorporate them into their technology and daily life. A plant that thrived in harsh conditions could be used to create food or medicine. A mineral that conducted energy efficiently could power engines or communication systems. Humans were no longer simply adapting, they were inventing, creating a future that was uniquely their own. The military aspect of human innovation also grew. Though they had no desire for conflict, humans understood that survival sometimes required defense. They developed strategies and tools to protect their settlements from both natural and alien threats. Weapons were designed not for aggression, but for safety and efficiency. Simulations and training ensured that every individual could contribute to the defense of the community. These preparations would later prove invaluable, as humans would face rivals who underestimated them at every turn. Humans also began experimenting with faster-than-light travel. It was the most ambitious project yet, requiring years of research, trial, and error. At first, progress was slow, and failures were frequent. Ships would vanish in tests or return damaged. But humans approached these setbacks differently from any other species. Each failure was dissected, analyzed, and used to refine the next attempt. Collaboration became the key. Teams of scientists, engineers, and pilots worked together, often around the clock, to find solutions that no single person could achieve alone. As the years passed, humans began to see the fruits of their labor. Ships became faster, more reliable, and capable of traveling further than any human had imagined before exile. Communication systems allowed near-instant coordination across entire star systems. Artificial intelligence had grown sophisticated enough to assist in daily life, resource management, and even strategic planning. The colonies were no longer isolated outposts struggling to survive. They were interconnected, thriving societies capable of achieving feats that the Galactic Council had never anticipated. The transformation was not only technological but cultural. Humans began to take pride not just in survival, but in what they had achieved despite exile. Stories circulated of daring explorations, ingenious inventions, and acts of courage that had saved lives or advanced knowledge. Art, music, and literature reflected the new human experience, blending the memory of Earth with the realities of life on alien worlds. These stories and creations inspired everyone, reinforcing the idea that humans were not just enduring, they were becoming something greater. Despite all the progress, humans remained cautious. They remembered the lesson of exile. The galaxy had tried to control them once, and it might try again. This awareness drove careful planning, long-term thinking, and a focus on sustainability. Resources were carefully managed, experiments were monitored, and communities were structured to ensure that no single failure could jeopardize the entire civilization. Humans were learning not just to create, but to create wisely. By the end of this period, humans had achieved something extraordinary. They had turned exile from a punishment into an opportunity. They had learned to survive in the harshest conditions, to innovate in ways the galaxy had never seen, and to build a society that valued cooperation, knowledge, and resilience above all else. The seeds of an empire had been planted, not through conquest, but through ingenuity and determination. As humans looked up at the stars, they no longer saw only exile or limitation. They saw possibilities. They understood that the technology they had created, combined with the resilience and creativity that had carried them through years of struggle, could allow them to expand, explore, and eventually rise to a position of power that no one, not even the Galactic Council, could ignore. Humans had discovered a truth that no species had ever truly mastered: adversity. When faced with intelligence, unity, and persistence could be transformed into strength. The stage was set for the next chapter. Humans were no longer merely survivors. They were innovators, explorers, and builders. The technology they had created, the communities they had forged, and the culture of ingenuity they had nurtured would soon propel them beyond the limits of exile. The future was no longer defined by punishment, scarcity, or fear. It was defined by potential, creativity, and a determination to rise above the galaxy's expectations. And so, with their new technology, refined skills, and unbreakable spirit, humans were ready to take the next step. They had learned that exile could not defeat them. It could not contain them, and it would not stop them from reaching for the stars. In the cold silence of distant planets, humans were quietly building the tools and the vision that would one day allow them to dominate the galaxy. Not through violence or fear, but through ingenuity, resilience, and the indomitable strength of their collective spirit. After years of struggle, survival, and technological breakthroughs, humans were no longer the species that the Galactic Council had exiled. They had adapted, learned, and grown stronger than anyone could have predicted. Life in exile had forged unity, resilience, and creativity. Now, humans were ready to take the next step, the rise of power. They were beginning to realize that survival was no longer their only goal. Expansion, influence, and a new kind of dominance were possible. Humans began to organize their growing colonies into a structured society. Communication networks connected planets and settlements across star systems, allowing ideas, technology, and resources to flow efficiently. Councils were formed, not to control people, but to ensure coordination, planning, and growth. Every individual had a role, whether as an engineer, scientist, medic, pilot, or strategist. Each contribution mattered because humans understood that their survival and progress depended on cooperation. The strength of the community became the backbone of the growing human influence as the colonies expanded. Humans began establishing trade and diplomatic relationships with smaller alien civilizations. These were species that had once been overlooked by the Galactic Council or dismissed as minor. Humans approached them not as conquerors, but as partners. They offered knowledge, protection, and technology in exchange for cooperation and shared resources. Many of these civilizations were impressed by the speed of human development and the ingenuity of their technology. Humans were building alliances that would later prove invaluable, not through coercion, but through respect and mutual benefit. Military strength was also developing alongside diplomacy. Humans did not seek war, but they understood that power required the ability to defend oneself. Training programs were established across colonies, focusing on strategy, adaptability, and precision rather than brute force. Humans created ships capable of both defense and exploration, combining speed, stealth, and advanced weaponry. Unlike other civilizations, humans did not rely solely on numbers or raw power. They relied on intelligence, innovation, and the ability to adapt quickly to new threats. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, was beginning to take notice. Reports of human success reached their chambers, though many dismissed them at first, believing that humans were still limited by exile. But the more the Council watched, the more they realized that humans were not only surviving, they were thriving, building networks, creating advanced technology, and forming alliances that extended their influence across multiple star systems. There was unease in the Council, a quiet acknowledgement that their earlier decision to exile humans might have been a grave mistake. Humans, however, were not focused on the Council's perception. Their attention was on growth, innovation, and opportunity. Colonies became hubs of learning and production, with specialized industries forming to meet the needs of the growing human presence. Engineers developed new propulsion systems, energy sources, and construction methods. Scientists explored distant worlds for resources, and research opportunities. Every achievement reinforced the idea that humans were capable of more than mere survival. They were capable of leadership, ingenuity, and vision. Culture also evolved during this period. Art, music, and literature flourished, blending human history with the experience of life in exile. Stories of survival, invention, and courage were shared widely, inspiring younger generations to push boundaries and dream bigger. Education emphasized not only technical skills, but also ethics, creativity, and strategy. Humans were learning that true power was not only in technology or military strength, it was in the ability to inspire, organize, and innovate. Strategically, humans began mapping nearby star systems and identifying locations for new colonies. These were not random settlements. They were carefully chosen based on resources, defense capabilities, and potential for growth. Each new colony became a node in a growing network of human influence, connected by communication systems and supply chains. Humans were thinking long-term, planning not just for immediate survival, but for sustained expansion that would allow them to compete with even the most advanced civilizations. Innovation continued to drive progress. Humans developed energy shields, advanced communication networks, and adaptive AI systems capable of predicting environmental and strategic challenges. They refined faster-than-light travel, enabling longer and safer journeys to previously unreachable star systems. Every technological advance increased their independence and power, making them less reliant on external aid and more capable of shaping their own destiny. Diplomacy became a skill humans mastered alongside technology and strategy. They learned to negotiate with smaller civilizations, sometimes mediating conflicts between alien species to gain trust and build alliances. Humans showed that power could be achieved through intelligence, fairness, and foresight, rather than intimidation or domination. This approach earned them respect, and slowly the reputation of humanity began to spread across the galaxy. As humans' influence grew, they began to establish a recognizable identity as a rising power. Flags, symbols, and emblems were created to represent unity and purpose. Laws and codes were established to ensure order, fairness, and efficiency within human settlements. These structures were not imposed from above, but were developed collectively, reflecting the shared values of survival, innovation, and mutual respect. Humans were building not just colonies, but a civilization capable of enduring and thriving across time and space. Conflict was not absent during this period. Competing species sometimes challenged humans' expansion, testing their technology, strategy, and adaptability. But humans had learned the value of preparation and innovation. They responded not with reckless aggression, but with carefully calculated strategies that combined technology, intelligence, and flexibility. Their victories were not just military, they were lessons, proving that humans could overcome even the most unexpected challenges. The combination of diplomacy, technology, and strategic expansion began to pay off. Humans were no longer seen as an exiled species struggling to survive. They were recognized as a growing power with potential to influence the balance of power in the galaxy. Smaller civilizations sought alliances with them, offering resources, trade, and knowledge. Humans were creating a network of influence that extended far beyond the reach of the Galactic Council. Humans also began to formalize governance structures for their expanding empire. Councils, advisory boards, and scientific committees ensured that growth was sustainable, ethical, and coordinated. Decisions were made based on merit and expertise, rather than hierarchy or privilege. Leadership was earned, not inherited. This system allowed humans to harness the full potential of every individual, turning innovation, strategy, and creativity into collective power. By the end of this period, humans had transformed exile into opportunity. They had created a civilization that was technologically advanced, strategically capable, and culturally rich. They had built alliances, developed military and exploration capabilities, and established governance structures that would support further expansion. They were no longer the species that had been punished. They were a force to be reckoned with. Humans understood that the next steps would require even greater vision. The galaxy was still vast, full of civilizations that had long assumed humans were weak and insignificant. But humans had learned a valuable lesson from exile. Strength comes not just from technology or numbers, but from unity, creativity, and determination. Every challenge faced in exile had prepared them for the moment when they would rise to claim their place among the stars. As humans looked outward, they saw opportunities everywhere. Star systems filled with resources, civilizations open to alliances, and territories waiting to be explored. Exile had forced them to grow in ways that no peaceful life could have. It had taught them discipline, resilience, and the ability to innovate under pressure. The very punishment meant to weaken them had become the foundation of their strength. And so, with colonies thriving, alliances forming, technology advancing, and a sense of unity stronger than ever, humans entered a new era. No longer simply surviving, they were building power. They were learning to influence the galaxy, to defend themselves against threats, and to expand strategically and ethically. The era of exile had ended. The era of rise and dominance was beginning. Humans were no longer a species to be underestimated. They had transformed adversity into opportunity, weakness into strength, and exile into the first step of a future empire. The Galactic Council had cast them aside, but humans had grown beyond the need for their approval. They were building a civilization that could thrive on its own terms, and the galaxy would soon have no choice but to take notice. By the time humans had established themselves as a rising power in the galaxy, whispers of their success had reached the ears of the Galactic Council. The very species they had exiled and underestimated was now creating alliances, advancing technology, and expanding influence at a speed no one had anticipated. The Council could no longer ignore humanity, though many still hoped that their progress was fragile, that the challenges of survival and expansion would slow them down. They had misjudged humans once before, and that mistake would soon become painfully clear. Humans, for their part, were focused not on revenge, but on survival and growth. They knew that the Council might seek to undermine them, or worse, attempt to assert control again. Every strategy, every innovation, and every alliance had been carefully planned with the awareness that conflict could come. This readiness, however, was not born of fear alone. It was born of experience, creativity, and the lessons of exile. Humans had learned that preparation, intelligence, and unity were stronger than fear or intimidation. The first step in asserting themselves was visibility. Humans sent envoys and diplomats to nearby civilizations, demonstrating their technological advancements, strategic capabilities, and willingness to cooperate. These missions were not aggressive. They were demonstrations of strength, intelligence, and reliability. They showed that humans were not a species to be dismissed, that they had grown beyond the limitations of exile, and that they could now operate on equal footing with other advanced civilizations. Reports of human capabilities began to reach the Galactic Council more frequently. Smaller species and civilizations had begun aligning themselves with humans, sharing resources, knowledge, and strategic advantages. The Council sent representatives to investigate, initially under the assumption that humans were bluffing or overextending. They expected to find weakness or disorganization. What they discovered instead was a society that was technologically advanced, culturally united, and strategically sophisticated. Humans had transformed adversity into power, and it was visible in every colony, ship, and communication network. The Council attempted diplomacy, sending envoys to negotiate and test the humans' intentions. They hoped to regain influence, perhaps even control, over the exiled species. But humans approached these negotiations with calm confidence. They did not fear the council, nor did they seek unnecessary conflict. They demonstrated their capabilities, their alliances, and their willingness to act independently. The message was clear. Humans were no longer a species to be controlled, ignored, or underestimated. Tension grew as the council realized that humanity's rise was not a temporary phase. Humans had learned to combine diplomacy, technology, and strategy in ways that were difficult to counter. Their fleets were faster and more versatile than the council had predicted. Their colonies were self-sufficient and strategically positioned. Their alliances with other civilizations were strong, based on trust, mutual benefit, and shared vision. Every measure of power and influence indicated that humans were now a force the council could not easily challenge. The first open confrontation, when it came, was not a full-scale war, but a test of strength and resolve. The council attempted to impose restrictions on human expansion, claiming territories and resources that humans had already begun to utilize. Humans responded strategically, not with reckless aggression, but with calculated action. They reinforced colonies, strengthened communication networks, and prepared defensive measures while simultaneously offering peaceful solutions that respected both their interests and those of neighboring civilizations. The council was unprepared for this approach. Other civilizations often responded to threats with immediate submission or conflict, but humans demonstrated a unique combination of assertiveness and diplomacy. They did not seek unnecessary destruction, but they would not be ignored or constrained. Every move was deliberate, every action a display of competence and unity. The council's envoys reported back not just frustration, but astonishment at the humans' strategic skill and organizational efficiency. Humans also began to reveal capabilities that the council had not anticipated. Their fleets were not only technologically advanced, but flexible, capable of operating in multiple environments and adapting to changing threats. Their AI systems could manage logistics, communication, and tactical strategy simultaneously. Their colonies were capable of rapid mobilization in the event of threat. This level of coordination and adaptability had been honed through years of exile, survival, and innovation, and it gave humans a decisive edge. In parallel, humans demonstrated cultural and ethical strength. They emphasized diplomacy, alliances, and cooperation, even in the face of potential conflict. They showed that their strength was not only in technology or numbers, but also in unity, trust, and shared vision. Civilizations that observed humanity's rise often aligned with them voluntarily, inspired by their example of strength without oppression. The message was clear. Humans had learned to lead not through fear, but through capability, integrity, and intelligence. As confrontations continued, the council realized that direct interference would no longer be effective. Humans had built a network of influence that extended far beyond any single system. Any attempt to strike at humanity directly risked alienating other civilizations that now trusted and collaborated with them. The council's power, which had once seemed absolute, was now challenged by a combination of strategy, diplomacy, and technological innovation that humans had mastered through exile and struggle. The human response was steady and strategic. They did not attack unless provoked, and even then, their actions were calculated to neutralize threats efficiently without unnecessary destruction. They demonstrated their strength by creating secure colonies, resilient fleets, and reliable communication networks. Each action reinforced the idea that humans were a species that could not be intimidated, controlled, or ignored. The council had sought to exile humans because they feared their potential. But now that potential had been fully realized, and it could not be denied. The first true victories of this confrontation were symbolic as much as they were strategic. Humans successfully defended critical colonies against threats that the council believed would overwhelm them. They negotiated alliances with civilizations that the Council had expected to oppose them. They showcased technology and innovation that allowed them to operate independently and efficiently. Every success was a clear demonstration that humans had evolved beyond the limitations imposed by exile and were now a dominant presence in the galaxy. Perhaps most importantly, humans had learned patience. They did not rush into conflict or overreach. They waited for opportunities, planned carefully, and acted decisively. Their strategy combined long-term vision with immediate tactical skill, a combination that few civilizations could match. The Council, despite its resources and authority, found itself reacting to human actions rather than initiating them. The roles had reversed. The exiled species was now setting the pace, determining the rules, and establishing influence on its own terms. Stories of these confrontations spread across the galaxy. Civilizations once loyal to the Council began to question its authority, inspired by humanity's achievements. They saw a species that had faced exile, danger, and scarcity, yet emerged stronger, more united, and more capable than anyone could have predicted. Humans had turned adversity into an advantage, demonstrating that strength is not merely a matter of numbers or authority, but of creativity, resilience, and unity. Not by the end of this period. Humans had clearly established themselves as a rising power. They were no longer exiles struggling to survive. They were leaders, innovators, and strategic thinkers capable of influencing the balance of power in the galaxy. The confrontation with the Council was not merely about territory or resources. It was about recognition. Humans had proven that they could stand independently, thrive under pressure, and command respect through intelligence, unity, and vision. This period of confrontation solidified the identity of humanity. They had been exiled, underestimated, and dismissed, but they had overcome every challenge through ingenuity, cooperation, and persistence. They had learned to combine technology, strategy, and diplomacy in ways that other civilizations could not match. They had transformed the threat of exile into the foundation of strength, proving that adversity could become a catalyst for greatness. Humans knew that the galaxy had changed. The Council had once been the ultimate authority, deciding who could thrive and who could be cast aside. Now, humans had demonstrated that authority could be challenged, not through rebellion or chaos, but through careful planning, innovation, and unity. Their victory was not just strategic, it was moral and cultural. They had shown that strength without integrity is hollow, and that intelligence combined with cooperation is unstoppable. As humans looked to the future, they realized that the confrontation with the Council was only the beginning. They had proven their strength, but the galaxy still held challenges, rival civilizations, and opportunities for growth. What had begun as survival in exile had evolved into power, influence, and the potential to reshape the galaxy. Humans had learned the most important lesson of all. Exile and adversity were not the end. They were the forge in which a dominant. With the confrontation against the Galactic Council behind them, humans were no longer a species defined by exile or survival. They had proven their resilience, intelligence, and strategic skill. Their colonies thrived, their fleets were advanced and adaptable, and their alliances with other civilizations strengthened their influence. The galaxy, which once saw humans as a minor, unpredictable species, now recognized them as a dominant and innovative force. The first step in cementing their legacy was to unify all human settlements under a shared vision. Councils and advisory boards, once focused on survival, now turned their attention to governance, culture, and long-term planning. Laws were codified to ensure fairness, security, and sustainability, not only within individual colonies, but across the growing network of human influence. These laws reflected the values that had emerged during exile: cooperation, ingenuity, and a commitment to protect the weak while empowering the strong. Every decision, from resource management to education, was designed to strengthen the society as a whole. Education became central to humanity's legacy. Schools and learning centers flourished across planets, teaching not only science, technology, and strategy, but also ethics, history, and diplomacy. The stories of human struggle, survival, and innovation were shared widely, instilling pride and inspiring the next generation. Children born in this era no longer remembered the fear of exile, but they carried its lessons in their spirit: resilience, curiosity, and a refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. Humans were creating a civilization capable of enduring challenges for generations to come. Technology continued to advance at an astonishing pace. Humans refined faster-than-light travel, energy shields, AI management systems, and communication networks. Every new discovery made them more self-sufficient and more capable of influencing the galaxy. They also developed technologies to protect not just themselves, but allied civilizations, reinforcing their reputation as leaders who acted with wisdom and integrity. Each invention, each advancement, added to the growing perception that humans were not only survivors, they were pioneers, innovators, and architects of a new galactic era. The human fleet became a symbol of both strength and strategy. Ships were capable of traveling vast distances, defending colonies, and responding quickly to threats. Humans trained their crews not just in combat, but in strategy, adaptability, and coordination. Unlike other civilizations, which often relied on overwhelming numbers or brute force, humans combined intelligence, technology, and creativity to achieve maximum effect with precision and efficiency. Their fleet was not merely a tool of war, it was a demonstration of human ingenuity and discipline. Diplomacy remained equally important. Humans understood that true dominance did not come from conquest alone, but from building alliances and partnerships. They negotiated treaties, shared technology with trusted civilizations, and mediated disputes when it strengthened interstellar relationships. This approach earned them respect and loyalty. Civilizations that had once feared humans now looked to them as leaders and examples of strategic, ethical power. Humans were proving that influence could be exercised without tyranny, and that leadership was strongest when it inspired cooperation rather than fear. Culture flourished alongside technology and diplomacy. Music, art, literature, and storytelling reflected the human journey from exile to dominance. These cultural expressions reinforced shared identity, values, and pride in their accomplishments. They reminded humans of where they had come from, what they had endured, and what they could achieve. Celebrations, festivals, and memorials honored the courage, ingenuity, and resilience that had defined humanity for generations. This cultural cohesion strengthened the bonds between colonies and ensured that humans remained united despite the vast distances separating them. Humans also worked to ensure sustainability and efficiency in every aspect of their civilization. Resources were carefully managed, technologies optimized, and colonies designed for long-term growth. Lessons learned during exile were embedded in every system. Redundancy, adaptability, and resilience were priorities. Humans knew that the galaxy was vast, unpredictable, and often dangerous. By preparing for challenges before they arose, humans ensured that their empire would endure even the most unexpected crisis. As their influence grew, humans began to redefine the balance of power in the galaxy. Other civilizations that had once been loyal to the Galactic Council now sought alliances with humans. Even the Council itself, which had exiled humanity decades earlier, had no choice but to recognize their sovereignty and strength. The humans' rise had not been sudden. It was the result of decades of perseverance, innovation, and strategic thinking. Their success served as a lesson to the galaxy. Underestimated species could rise to dominance when given the opportunity. And driven by resilience, humans also focused on exploration. They mapped distant star systems, discovered new planets, and established colonies on worlds that had once seemed unreachable. Each new world added resources, strategic positions, and opportunities for research and innovation. Exploration was not just about growth, it was about understanding the galaxy, learning from its mysteries, and ensuring that humanity's civilization would remain adaptable and forward-looking. Curiosity, one of humanity's oldest traits, continued to drive progress even in the midst of empire-building. Military strength remained a component of their dominance. But it was used strategically and responsibly. Humans avoided unnecessary conflict, choosing instead to demonstrate capability and deterrence. Their fleets were powerful enough to discourage aggression, but humans preferred to resolve disputes through negotiation, cooperation, and strategic partnerships. This balance of power, combined with diplomacy and technological innovation, ensured that humans were respected rather than feared, a rare combination in a galaxy often ruled by force. The human identity evolved into something extraordinary. They were no longer simply survivors, inventors, or explorers. They were leaders, visionaries, and architects of a new era. Their shared experiences, from exile to technological renaissance to strategic dominance, created a sense of purpose and pride that bound humans together. Communities remained interconnected, governance remained fair and effective, and every individual understood that their contributions mattered to the collective success of humanity. By this stage, humans had truly built the most dominant empire in the galaxy. It was not dominance achieved through oppression or conquest alone, but through innovation, resilience, diplomacy, and unity. The Galactic Council's decision to exile humanity had inadvertently forged a civilization stronger, wiser, and more capable than they had ever imagined. Humans had turned adversity into strength, fear into opportunity, and exile into a platform for greatness. Humans' legacy extended beyond technology and power. They had created a culture that valued intelligence, cooperation, and ethical leadership. Their colonies were hubs of learning, creativity, and innovation. Their fleets symbolized not only strength, but ingenuity. And their diplomacy proved that influence could be achieved through respect and strategic collaboration rather than force alone. Humanity's empire was a testament to the potential of perseverance, vision, and unity. Even centuries after their exile, humans remembered their past. The stories of hardship, struggle, and survival were passed down through generations, not as tales of sorrow, but as reminders of how far they had come and what they could achieve. Exile had been the crucible that shaped their civilization, teaching lessons that prosperity alone never could. Humanity's history became a source of inspiration, guiding future generations to continue innovating, exploring, and leading. As humans looked to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, they no longer saw limits. They saw opportunities, challenges, and possibilities for growth, influence, and discovery. The empire they had built was not static, it was alive, adaptable, and forward-looking. Humans were prepared to meet whatever the galaxy had to offer, confident in their ability to thrive, innovate, and lead. The transformation was complete. From exiled outcasts to pioneers, from survivors to innovators, from underestimation to dominance, humans had achieved what no one had predicted. They had become the most dominant civilization in the galaxy, not through sheer force alone, but through ingenuity, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit that had carried them through exile. And so, humanity stood ready for the future. Their empire was a reflection of everything they had learned, built, and achieved. The galaxy now looked to them with respect, curiosity, and sometimes awe. The story of exile had ended, but the story of humanity, its rise, its influence, and its enduring legacy, was only beginning. In the vast expanse of stars, humans had carved their place, proving that adversity could become opportunity, and that a species capable of learning, adapting, and innovating could rise to dominate even the galaxy itself.